you take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife?" the priest asked Michael, but he remained silent. The moment lasted an eternity, and the room held its breath. Then Michael laughed, loudly, sharply, almost mockingly. "Before we continue, leave a comment with the city you're watching from, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel as I share interesting life stories with you every day. Enjoy the listening." Annie's white dress seemed weightless, floating around her figure in time to the exciting wedding melody. Michael stood at the altar. His black suit contrasted with the surroundings. He appeared calm, but inside him raged a storm of doubts. Every breath and movement was tense. Annie appeared at the doorway, and the room filled with awe-inspired gasps. Her dress, with lace sleeves and a long train, created an image of regal grace. She had dreamed of this day for years, the celebration of love, the union of two hearts. But something was amiss. In Michael's eyes there was not love, but doubt. An inner voice whispered to him about the mismatch, about how this union was not his path. He felt trapped. With each passing minute the pressure mounted. As Annie came closer, Michael suddenly stepped back. The music abruptly stopped, and a deathly silence fell over the hall. Guests exchanged bewildered glances and growing tension. "I can't," Michael said quietly but clearly. "I've been thinking, what's the point of all this?" he said, addressing the room more than the bride. "Seriously, look at us. We're so different." Annie stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. Her perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, her dream, everything collapsed in a second. Tears stung her eyes and she clenched her teeth. Her father was the first to react. He frowned, ready to say something but remained silent. Her mother raised her arms in disbelief. Guests began whispering, and a murmur of confused voices rose. Michael quickly made his way to the exit without looking back. The echo of his steps resonated through the vast hall, growing fainter and fainter. Annie was left alone amidst the white decor, surrounded by flowers and shattered hopes. She remembered how they met in Boston 3 years ago, how they promised each other eternal love, how they planned their life together. And now, the complete collapse of all plans. Her friend Susan was the first to approach, draping a coat over Annie's shoulders and quietly whispering, "Let's get out of here." Annie nodded silently. Her wedding dress, which had seemed so grand moments ago, now looked ridiculous, like an actress suddenly forced off the stage in the middle of a play. Stepping out of the hall, Annie took a deep breath of cold air. Tears finally ran down her cheeks, washing away the flawless makeup, but they were no longer of despair, just a strange mix of pain, resentment, and some inner resolve. The wedding bells were silent, only fragments of memories, and the bitter taste of an unfulfilled dream remained. Sunlight slowly seeped through the curtains of a small apartment on the outskirts of Detroit, where Annie moved shortly after the botched wedding. Annie sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring out the window. Behind her lay the noisy city, a wedding that never happened, and the life she had planned with Michael. A local bakery, an old building with wooden beams, and the smell of fresh-baked bread became her new refuge. Mrs. Helen, the elderly owner, greeted Annie with warmth and understanding. Her tired eyes carried traces of her own life's trials. "You've been through a lot, dear," Mrs. Helen said, showing Annie how to knead dough. Annie listened and carefully formed buns. Her hands, once accustomed to office papers and computer keys, now covered in a light dusting of flour, grew stronger with each passing day. Working in the bakery became therapy for her. Every morning, Annie arrived before everyone else to prepare the dough and arrange fresh ingredients. The scent of cinnamon and fresh bread helped drown out thoughts of the past. Mrs. Helen quickly noticed something special in Annie, not just a worker, but someone seeking herself. "You could just work," Mrs. Helen once said, "but you want something more." The words of the older woman resonated with Annie. She truly wanted more, to help people, to be needed, to find her path. One day, during a short break, Annie saw an announcement for orderlies at a local hospital. Something inside her stirred. She felt a call she had long ignored. After her shift at the bakery, Annie went to the hospital. A conversation with the chief doctor became a revelation for her. She learned about programs that help children with severe illnesses and volunteer programs. "Do you have the desire to help?" the doctor asked. "More than just a desire," Annie replied. Her past life, office meetings, ambitious plans now seemed like a distant dream. Here, in this small town, she was discovering a completely different reality. In the evening, sitting in her tiny apartment, Annie began studying literature on social work. A grant for education became her next goal. Each textbook page was a step towards a new self. Michael was now just a name from the past. The pain from the breakup gradually subsided, giving way to new dreams and hopes. The hospital corridor greeted Annie with cold and dull grey walls. Each step was filled with internal tension. Her first day as an orderly was not just a career change, it was a real acknowledgement of her calling. The head nurse, an elderly woman with a tired yet kind gaze, looked at Annie attentively. "Are you ready for this job?" she asked quietly. "This is not a place for the faint-hearted." "I'm ready," Annie replied, without the slightest hesitation. The first days of work were a real trial for her. Children with cancer needed not only physical care, but also emotional support. Every smile, every moment of pain relief became a small victory for Annie. Alexandra, a 12-year-old girl confined to a hospital bed, became special to her. Sasha had leukemia, but her eyes sparkled with incredible strength. They became friends almost instantly. "Aunt Annie, tell me a story," Sasha would ask, and Annie would talk about dreams, human spirit, and the importance of not giving up. She understood that every word she spoke was not just entertainment for a sick child, but a small therapy of hope. In the evenings, after exhausting shifts, Annie sat with documents, researching possibilities for obtaining a professional education in social work. The grant that could help her continue her education was becoming an increasingly real goal. Her friend Susan was surprised when she learned about Annie's new job. "Are you serious? After everything that's happened, you found the strength to help others?" "That's exactly why," Annie smiled. "When you're hurting, you begin to understand the pain of others. Every day brought new experience." Annie saw how children, despite terrifying diagnoses, kept hope and joy. They became her teachers of courage. One morning, the head nurse called Annie to her office. On the table lay the grant competition documents. "Your story about working with disabled children made a strong impression," she said. "I think you should apply." Annie felt something ignite within her. It was not just about education, it was an opportunity to create a real project to help children. Memories no longer brought pain, only the understanding that every person must find their path. Her path was here, among hospital corridors, children's smiles, and quiet deeds of mercy. Annie no longer had doubts. She was in her place. When she submitted the documents for the grant and received a positive response, she realized her journey was just beginning. 3 years had passed since that tragic wedding day. Michael sat in his apartment, flipping through a magazine, when he unexpectedly came across a photograph of Annie. Her smiling face was far removed from the frightened and lost look he remembered on their aborted wedding day. Annie was standing on a conference stage, confident and inspiring, beside a banner bearing the logo of her social foundation, Hope. She looked entirely different, composed, determined, with eyes burning with genuine desire to help people. Michael felt a strange mix of emotions. He read the article carefully. Annie spoke about the project to help children with serious illnesses, about rehabilitation and psychological support programs. Each of her words was filled with sincerity and compassion for others' fates. It was a true calling, unlike his own, where he still floundered between work and the search for self. His career trajectory seemed dull against Annie's achievements. He had tried himself in various fields, from amateur sports to scientific research, but nowhere did he find that core, that inner motivation so evident in her life's journey. Annie created change in specific people's lives, while Michael felt his life had stalled. He laid down the magazine and stared out the window. The cityscape seemed grey and lifeless compared to the emotions he felt looking at Annie's photograph. In his mind, thoughts swirled about how much he had missed, how frivolously he had treated serious matters. Annie had found herself while he still floundered in search of his own self. Her example became a painful yet crucial lesson. Michael decided it was time to act. He began studying the experiences of social projects, enrolled in volunteer courses, and started attending charitable events. Every step was difficult. He was far from the selflessness that Annie exemplified, but persistence and the desire to change pushed him forward. His thoughts kept returning to her, the girl he once left at the wedding altar. Annie's photograph at the conference served as a mirror, reflecting not only her path, but also his own unrealized potential. Michael firmly decided he too would find his path, not to emulate Annie, but to become the best version of himself. Michael stood by a distant wall, nervously adjusting his tie when he saw Annie. She was completely different, confident, composed, radiating an inner strength he hadn't noticed before. Annie appeared in an elegant evening dress, her hair neatly pinned, her gaze focused and serene. She spoke with guests, discussing the social projects of her foundation, which in recent years had become known for its charitable work. Michael watched her from afar, feeling envy, admiration, and profound regret simultaneously. He saw how much she had changed since their breakup. Once a shy and apprehensive girl, she had transformed into a strong woman who knew her worth. When their eyes met, time seemed to stand still. Annie was the first to break the silence, slowly walking toward him. "Hello, Michael." Her voice was calm, without a hint of resentment. "Hello, Annie," he replied, feeling a contraction in his chest. They stood side by side, yet between them lay a chasm of unspoken words. Michael noticed Annie's evaluative glance, as if trying to discern how much he had changed. "Do you work a lot with your foundation?" Michael asked, attempting small talk. "Yes, almost every day," Annie smiled. "We help children with serious illnesses. It's not easy, but very important." In her eyes was a special gleam, one he recalled from moments when she spoke of things genuinely meaningful to her. But now that gleam had deepened and become more aware. "I've seen your interviews," Michael confessed. "You've accomplished a lot." Annie merely nodded, unwilling to expand on the topic. An uneasy silence filled the space between them, laden with memories and unsaid words. Annie melded back into the crowd, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. He realized this encounter was no mere chance. It was an opportunity to reassess his life. The entire evening, Michael's gaze couldn't escape Annie. Each of her movements and gestures signaled a profound personal transformation. As the evening drew to a close, Michael understood that he needed to sort through his feelings. The meeting with Annie was not accidental. It was a moment of truth demanding immediate action from him. He sensed that their paths, once diverged, were intertwining once more, but now in an entirely different context and with a whole new meaning. Michael stared at the blank sheet of paper before him. His fingers drummed nervously on the table, words caught between heart and mind. A month ago, he had penned the first letter, laden with emotion, remorse, and pain. It went unanswered, like a shout into the void. Now he was attempting a second one. Each line was a struggle, as if he were opening an old, unhealed wound. "Annie," he began, "I understand my words might seem hollow, but it's important to me that you know I've changed." He recalled the charity evening where he saw her for the first time in years. Annie stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the people she helped. Her eyes exuded confidence. Volunteering had become his salvation. Each day, he dedicated an hour or two to helping in various social projects. At first, it was mere imitation of Annie, but gradually it evolved into a genuine passion. He helped the elderly, worked in children's centers, and organized fundraisers for those in need. "I've realized," Michael continued writing, "our breakup was not an end, but a beginning, the beginning of my true maturation." He recalled Annie's magazine interview, her words about how everyone has the power to change even the smallest part of the world. Those words had deeply resonated with him. Michael was no longer the frightened man who once fled from a wedding. He was becoming someone else, a person with purpose. The letter was genuine. It contained neither excuses nor a plea to return to the past. It was merely an honest account of his journey post-separation. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he wrote, "because I know the past can't be undone, but I want you to know your example inspired me to become better." Once the letter was finished, Michael gazed at it for a long time. He understood that a response might never come, but the act of writing had been therapeutic for him, a means of acceptance and release. Michael sealed the envelope. His letter was not an attempt to reclaim the past. Each word written was a step towards a new version of himself. He sent the letter, knowing the most important thing wasn't the reply, but the path he had already traveled. Hope quietly filled him, like the soft but unstoppable glow of dawn. Michael sat at the table, a printout of a news article about a scandal in the Hope Charity Foundation laid before him. The headlines shouted of financial discrepancies that could jeopardize all of Annie's work. His heart clenched with worry. He knew Annie too well to believe she was involved in any shady dealings. Dialing her mobile number, Michael nervously pressed the call button several times. An inner voice urged him that he needed to intervene, support, and protect. When her voice came through the receiver, he felt a strange emotion. "Annie," he began cautiously, "I read the article about the foundation. I need to know what's going on." There was a pause on the line. He could hear her breathing growing more tense. "Michael," Annie's voice was tired but assured, "it's a complicated story. Not everything is as simple as it seems in the papers." They agreed to meet. She chose the place, a small cafe in the center of New York City, located between their former worlds. When Annie walked in, Michael was struck by her presence. She had changed. She was more confident, composed. She wore a formal blue dress, her hair neatly styled, not the timid girl he recalled from the wedding. "The scandal involves one of the foundation's partners," Annie began without preamble. "He tried to use part of the funds for personal purposes. We caught it in time and stopped it." Michael listened, amazed by her composure and professionalism. She spoke about the financial schemes as confidently as she once spoke of wedding plans. "How are you managing?" he asked quietly. Annie smiled, sincerely and openly for the first time during their conversation. "Challenges offer a chance to become stronger. The foundation will continue its work." Their eyes met. In Annie's eyes, there was no longer any resentment or hurt, only determination and tranquility. Michael realized he was facing a completely different person. After their meeting, he pondered her words for a long time. The scandal only reinforced his desire to create his own social project. He began studying Annie's experience, jotting down ideas he could implement. In the evening, while sorting through documents, he stumbled upon an old photograph. They were young, happy, until the moment everything fell apart. Writing another letter to Annie, he realized this was no longer an attempt to justify or retrieve the past. It was honest communication between two people who were once close, but now merely two destinies intersecting in a vast world. Annie, upon receiving the letter, gently placed it in a folder. She knew their stories continued, each in their direction, but with gratitude for the journey they had shared. Michael and Annie decided to meet one last time. Their last conversation was like a quiet river flowing between the banks of their past and present. They sat in a small cafe, where time seemed to stand still, and memories became almost tangible. Annie slowly removed a silver locket from her neck, the very one that held a piece of their shared history. Her fingers traced its smooth surface before she offered it to Michael. "Take it," she said softly. "It's a symbol of what was between us, not as a sign of pain, but as a reminder of the path we've traveled." Michael looked at the locket, a repository of their memories. Their relationship had once seemed fragile, like thin glass, but now it had gained the durability of stone, smoothed by time and experience. "We've both changed so much," he said, accepting the locket. "Back then at the wedding I was scared, afraid of responsibility, of adult life. Now I understand that fear was my greatest enemy." Annie smiled, that gentle smile now filled with wisdom and calm. Her eyes shone, not with tears of despair, as once, but with the light of understanding. "We grew parallel," she said. "Not together, but thanks to the experience that separation gave us." Michael pulled out the envelope with their farewell letter, but Annie stopped him. She understood it was their last act of openness. There was no justification here, Michael clarified, only acknowledgement and gratitude. She nodded. The waitress brought tea, and the rising steam between them symbolized their warm, yet no longer romantic relationship. Michael spoke of his social project for youth with disabilities. Annie occasionally asked probing questions, professionally and with interest. "Your foundation inspired me," he admitted. Annie touched his hand, a gesture of support and understanding. In that moment, they were not exes, but allies in a larger mission to help people. "We can be partners in this," she proposed, "not as husband and wife, but as professionals who believe in changing the world." Michael felt relief. Their breakup, once seeming the end of everything, now marked the beginning of something new, mature and mindful partnership. As they parted, their embrace was brief, but filled with profound respect. Michael put the letter in Annie's bag, the last thing he wanted to give her. Outside, light rain drizzled. Annie opened an umbrella. Michael stayed under the droplets. They looked at each other, two people who once dreamed of being together, now finding greater meaning in separate paths. "Thank you," they said simultaneously and laughed. Their paths diverged, but they did not break. Each continued their journey. Not rivalry or vengeance, but growth, acceptance, and mutual respect. The rain washed away the last traces of their past, unveiling horizons of new possibilities. Did you enjoy this story? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to not miss new releases. See you soon.